I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is More Than Blockchain. On the previous episode, I talked about how 0.1 or a tenth of a Bitcoin could be generational wealth. Go ahead and listen to that episode. I'm going to leave the link in the description of this episode. Today, I want to talk about how I think 0.1 Bitcoin is going to be enough to retire on, right? We've talked about it being generational wealth, something that you're going to pass down from generation to generation. And per the definition I have here, to basically create a lasting financial legacy among generations. Now, generations are normally defined between 20 and 30 years. So if I have a child today and I give it to the child when they're 20 or 30 years old, maybe when I'm transitioning and I'm leaving this world, it will be enough for them to keep on keeping on and ideally have enough to pass down to their children. And I do believe that that's the case for Bitcoin. So go ahead and check out that episode. Like I said, I'm going to leave that episode's link in the description below. So building on that, why I think 0.1, why I think you're going to be able to probably retire on that amount of Bitcoin. I want to go back and refer to Michael Saylor's keynote speech that he gave at Bitcoin Nashville. I'm going to leave that link also below. It was a true privilege to be able to be in that room and hear everything that Michael said. He said his bearish case by 2045 for Bitcoin is 3 million. His base case is around 13 million and his bull case is around 45 million. So I'm going to start using his base case of 13 million probably throughout some of the content we're going to do here on More Than Blockchain. And I used it in the previous episode just as kind of like a gauge. But if $13 million is the base case and you own 1/10 of a Bitcoin, then that means that you're going to own $1.3 million in Bitcoin. Now, it's really tough for us sitting in 2024 to kind of look out and be able to identify how much $1.3 million will be worth because it's tough. When my great aunt, who was born in 1913, I want to say, when she was a child, she would get to go to the Red Sox games here in Boston for 5 cents. That's how much the bleachers cost. Today, a seat could be $50 if they're playing well. That's a huge, basically, debasement of currency, or you could say inflation of prices. So I don't know if by the time 2045 comes around, if a seat in the bleachers to go see the Red Sox is going to be $500. And in that world, then maybe $1.3 million isn't a lot of money. But as we sit here today, let's think about $1.3 million and what it can kind of get you today. And why I think that people are going to be able to retire on 0.1 Bitcoin. And when I say people, I really kind of want to refer to millennials. Let's take a 35-year-old millennial who is putting in money into Bitcoin and saves up that 0.1 Bitcoin or a tenth of a Bitcoin. Now, with Bitcoin price today, it's around 60,000. That would basically be $6,000. So let's use a millennial who's 35 years old, takes $6,000, buys their Bitcoin. They have 0.1. They're basically going to wait 21 years, so the time they're 56, if my math is right, to 2045, and then they're going to be able to retire. And I say that because I think by that point, if Bitcoin's adoption reaches the levels that I think many people think it will, and definitely Michael Saylor, whose base case is 13 million, you're going to be able to live in so many of the UN recognized countries at that point with that amount of Bitcoin and spend whatever you need to get your water, your Wi-Fi, your roof, to get good food, to get your gym membership. Ideally, you won't have debt by that point. Pay off all the things you need to pay off, pay off your medical bills, pay off your monthly expenses, just using that amount of Bitcoin, probably forever. Because if it's $1.3 million and in a world where we know that less than, I think, 2/10 of a person's ever going to have a full Bitcoin, having 1/10 of a Bitcoin is going to be so rare that I think you're going to be able to live off it forever. Now, for anyone watching this who's part of the FIRE community or financial independence and retire early community, for a long time, the idea was the 4% rule, which is a super simple idea that basically says you need 4% returns to be able to live off of. So if you have $1 million, could you live off of $40,000 a year? If you can, then ideally the markets go up around 7% a year. You take 4% of those gains you take $40,000 of those gains if they're going up by 70%. So they go up, if you have $1 million portfolio, it's going to go up, it's going to appreciate at $70,000. You're going to take the taxes, pay the taxes. You're going to be left with around $40,000. Could you live on $40,000? This is the entire math around the retire early philosophy. Figure out what you need year on year. Do you have a stock portfolio or an investment portfolio or cash flowing real estate that will allow you to basically cover those expenses so you can, quote, retire or basically not have to work, basically find financial independence. Financial independence doesn't mean that you don't have to work. It just means that you're going to choose to work. So this is something that people have been looking at for a long, long time. It's called the 4% rule. If I have my $1 million stock portfolio and we know that year over year on average, let's say the stock market goes up 7% annually, can I pay the $30,000 into taxes and can I live off that $40,000? Well, I think 7% growth is where eventually 7 to 8 to 10%, probably 10% is eventually where Bitcoin will be, probably by 2045. Since its inception, I think on average it's been over like 150 to 160, 170, 180% per year compounding for the past 15 years. But in 21 years, I think it will be down somewhere between 5 to 10%, which means that you'll hold the same amount of Bitcoin year after year, or the amount of Bitcoin that you own, I should say, will actually be worth somewhere between 5 to 10% more year on year. Whether that actually keeps up is kind of tough to tell, but this is where I think Bitcoin becomes the new way that people retire. If we move on from 0.1 Bitcoin being able to retire on, which I totally think you can wrap your head around. And I actually think, depending upon where you live even today, if you really cut your expenses down and you live in a place where the local currency is just that advantageous, I think you could start to live on probably half or a full Bitcoin today forever. So eventually by 2045, that number will be down to about a tenth, possibly, which, going back to our example of a 35-year-old millennial who in 21 years, in 2045, when Bitcoin has hit Michael Saylor's base case of 13 million, I absolutely think you're going to be able to retire just on that. So coming back to today, if you are that 35-year-old millennial and you're watching this, for $6,000 today, you could basically set up your retirement plan, which is pretty crazy to set up a retirement plan for $6,000 when so many people take their Roth IRAs, they have money they're matching in their 401k, which exceeds, especially with the matching, can exceed $10,000 to $20,000 a year or whatever it is. Now, I know Roths and IRAs can have caps. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's like $5,000 or $6,000. But the point is, what most people put in their financial vehicles or in their homes, which they see as a financial vehicle, which will allow them to find financial prosperity, they're putting way more than $6,000 a year. And $6,000 a year over 12 months is only $500. This is where I think millennials, Gen Z, and absolutely Gen Alpha, they're all going to be trying to scrape together to get that 1/10 of a Bitcoin to see it as their retirement vehicle. Bitcoin is only becoming more and more scarce. And just about 2 days ago, we passed the point where more than 94% of all Bitcoin has been mined. That means there's only 6% of 21 million left, which is somewhere around 1.25 million. It's not a lot of Bitcoin that is out there. The scarcity, the debasement of all of these international currencies, even the debasement of the dollar, even the overall slower returns compared to inflation and currency debasement of the stock market, bonds, and more traditional vehicles, it's pushing people to start to see Bitcoin as what Larry Fink called, the flight to safety, right? The flight to quality, I think actually it was, even though I heard safety and he said quality. All that's to be said, this is not financial advice. You do want to look into this though, because I think for $6,000, you may be able to retire. Anyways, if you're watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please go ahead and subscribe. Share this with a family member, friend, or colleague, especially if they are Gen X, millennial, Gen Z. If they're Gen Alpha, I think Gen Alpha may be too young to be listening to this and thinking that, but definitely for Gen Z and millennial, there's a sweet spot right now to think about 0.1 Bitcoin as something that may help you reach retirement, right? It may be that retirement that you likely need, because while many of us are paying into Social Security, we're likely not going to see any of that money. But once again, not financial advice. Check out all of our other videos that talk about this. And make sure you check out the previous video where I talked about how 0.1 Bitcoin can be seen as generational wealth. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Follow us on social media at More Than Blockchain. If you have any questions, go ahead and DM me at More Than Blockchain on Instagram. I will see everyone next time.